Turn 2 was just more maneuver. So we sort of skipped that one. We have the French 11 Division. It's still very far in the back here. The 9th Division was attempting to fill in the gap between the 8th and the 10th, and they didn't get there. See the left flank of the 10th, the right flank of the 8th. Gigantic hole. Hope to get the 9th up there, but the Allied cavalry beat us to it. The 10th over here, basically using the end of the world to anchor their defense. They weren't able to deploy, but they should be able to get there this turn. See, the 2nd Allied line is spread out in front of them. The 8th Division made a pretty costly error here. Really just sort of misguessed how long it would take the Allies to get up. And right now, they have that left flank hanging in the air. Their cavalry did not get there in time. We have these 2 cavalry units for the Allies right there on the flank. They pose a very big threat to the back side of this portion of the line here. Even getting these cavalry across the stream is not going to help too much. So they're in a lot of trouble, and they're going to have to adjust this turn in order to recover that. On the Allied side, you can see that they have made pretty good progress here. They've more or less deployed. The first line is ready to crash into the Großgorschen. One thing is that this is a sunken road right here, so that's kind of a bit of a barrier. So I've just moved the cavalry on the west side of the sunken road just to sort of screen. And we're going to keep the bulk of the line on the east side. Try to take Gorsha from the east side of the road. The reserve line here is just moving forward. The infantry and guns are kind of slowly trundling behind that cavalry force that was able to get into this gap. Now they're hoping to just sort of hold that gap and screen, keep the French infantry at bay long enough for the rest of the reserve line to come up and try to push through. I don't foresee a lot of, sensible attacking here with this cavalry, but might do it just for the fun of it, just for the demonstration. Then we come to the second line, and they are starting to deploy. They're getting their artillery up. That was the main goal here, to get some skirmishers and infantry to screen a little bit to get the artillery in position to start pounding away at this 10th Division. So that's where it stands, and we'll take on turn number 3. Now, since the point of this exercise is to see the different mechanics in operation in each of the rule sets, we've already seen command, such as it is, and maneuver. We want to see some combat. So I'm going to blow through the French half of the turn and pick this up with the coalition, since I expect them to be a little more aggressive in the attack, while the French are mainly just trying to hold on in a defensive posture. So starting the coalition half of the turn, we see the French have made a very haphazard and ineffective attempt to link up their lines. They're especially vulnerable here in the west. So our command is, just setting our timer for our movement. As far as a charge phase, I don't think I'm going to charge right now, even though might be a couple of spots. I'm going to try to hold on to my cavalry a little bit, but I'm going to demonstrate something that is perfectly legitimate in the premier rules during the movement section. So we'll just get right on to that. So to start movement here, I'm going to move my reserve cavalry in a way that is perfectly legitimate. That causes a fire attack, opportunity fire from that square. And their fire factor is times 2, so that's 12, but it's thirded, so that's 4. That's 1 to 1.5. And I have 12, so that's plus 3. And it just does not go too well for these hussars. They do take a casualty, but their morale is unaffected. They pass their morale check. So we're going to continue to move them. What I'm doing is I'm going to sweep in right around and get on the rear of that French unit. I learned my lesson. Another opportunity fire attack missed. Get on his rear. Now I've got 2 large cavalry regiments in behind the French lines. Let's get maybe 1 more over there. Opportunity fire fails. Just confirming I can move my cavalry through that windmill. Let's see, it's going to be... Got another opportunity fire attack, and we able to hit that pretty effectively. So they do pass their morale check in spite of their casualty. I don't think I can do any real damage anymore. So I'm just going to try to exploit that gap. Okay, so that is some cavalry running by those squares, getting in the rear of the line. Now the reason I'm going to call attention to that will become clear later in the turn, but now I'm just going to go on with our movement here and finish it off. So we were able to close in a couple of spots here. Got some artillery unlimbered. Still have our skirmishers in the way. We're going to let them take some shots before we open up our gun line. Shifting across just the further advance of the reserves. And going across to the second line. Just to try to get ourselves into position with some artillery and some infantry. And our big move was, of course, these cavalry regiments in behind the French line. They're going to be hard-pressed to do anything about that. And defensive fire starting on the east side, we have some spots right through here, these two regiments. But they're pretty poor fire factors, only ×2. So we can barely get 1-to-1 attacks. Throw our dice and no effect on either of these. We can move across here, firing at these skirmishers. And skirmishers are 14 defense. So no effect. So we threw 1, 2, 3, 4 dice. Got one more attack here. So no effect on all those defensive fires. No surprise, the French attack factors are very poor. If we go over towards the middle, you can basically fire that square at that cavalry. Not going to be a very good attack, but dice can sometimes help us. So we rolled a 62. I'm pretty sure that's going to be another casualty on that cavalry. So that'll be another casualty and a morale check. And the cavalry has a 15 morale, excellent. But the morale dice were a 14. That means those cavalry have routed. That's a good win for the French. Now comes our challenging route rules. Can't move closer to the enemy. Can't end our turn closer than we started. Can't go through zones of influence. We can't go away from we can't route basically backwards. So, have I killed myself? I think I'm going to have to route laterally here. I have no idea if that's a valid move or not. I'll let the judges decide that. But anyway, I took a risk with those cavalry, tried to get them into position, and I took some shots and I lost. So, all in all, I like that. Coming over here to the west side, we have some shots here on the skirmishers. And then here some more on the skirmishers, and then here on this line infantry. So I think these provisional light ×1, so I'm not going to get any hits off of that. So these guys just aren't good with the musket at all. So we have a shot here and here. And then we have here, and then one more there. So, low dice rolls all around, coupled with poor fire factors, means really only one effective defensive fire attack. Now the musketeers really aren't much better, but we have some artillery here as well. So first we'll fire with these musketeers. Then we have this artillery. And that artillery there. We have some more skirmishers. We're all in very poor numbers, so far all these attacks have come to naught. We have some artillery here and here we can fire. That's a pretty good attack. We rolled a I think he was in one hex, wasn't he? So we rolled a 56. which is 1 casualty. It's also a morale check. We rolled, this morale has a 31 for this unit. We rolled considerably less than that, so he is going to disorder and retreat. And one more attack here, 9. Fire these skirmishers here, another casualty. And a morale check, but they do stand their ground. That'll take care of us on the east side here, or west side, sorry. Now we'll shift ourselves over to the east. So I got some skirmishers firing along the line here. Eventually I'll get some artillery going. Wow, okay, so I fired artillery here, counter battery. Now there's a artillery battery there. I fired a 66 boxcars, and that only yields 1 casualty. I think it's 1 casualty. Better double check. Yeah, 1 casualty, but with the potential leader casualty, I actually have to make a morale check. So he is a 12 morale. I rolled a 15, subtracting his value. Even though he wasn't killed, I still have to make that check as if he were harmed. So that means he disorders. Then we have artillery here. Actually a pretty good shot. 61. All in high numbers here. So 1, 2, 3, that's going to be an 8 against 9, 1 to 1.5, so that will be a casualty. And the French will have to check morale. He 25, so he passes that morale check. I'm going to fire grenadiers against that line infantry. No effect. Have these musketeers against that infantry. Another good roll, another casualty. But we passed the morale check, which is the important part. Far worse to fail the morale check than lose a little strength. Now here we have this infantry that's going to fire on that cavalry. He is unsuccessful, so that should conclude our offensive fire phase. Which brings us to our assault and melee phase. And we'll undergo or undertake some ill-advised assaults just to do it. We're going to mark some assaults here by the infantry. And more than anything, I want to assault with that cavalry. Sorry, not an assault, it's a melee. Since they did not charge, they merely melee. And I think I'll just leave it at that with those attacks. So we'll start right here. They didn't charge, they just moved. Now they're going to melee. They're going to attack these French infantry in the rear. Has a 36 melee factor. And French have a 12. That is a rear attack. So it should be times 1.5 to the attack. No pre-melee morale check, so we'll just throw the dice. it ends up being a 4.5 to 1 attack, which results in a defender rout. So I have to rout and retreat. I'm going to retreat, I think, 1 hex here. That's a 1 increment loss. I think I have to retreat here for 2, 2nd increment loss, and 3 here, 3rd increment loss. I'm probably being deliberately difficult about this retreat stuff. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that will tire that cavalry. Since he only meleeed. And he'll be done. I should use my color-coded tired markers, but I don't think I'm ever going to recover that guy actually in the game, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to, again, attack here. So I need 11/12 of 36. Basically just about the same attack between those two. And I rolled another defender rout. So one, I have a little more room for this guy. 2, 3, 4. He loses 1 increment, and rout moves away. And again becomes tired. That's movement and melee with cavalry. We'll pick it up on the east side here. This infantry wants to melee this or assault this cavalry, but he's going to retreat because he has a movement differential greater than his attackers. So we'll just advance into the empty hex. That's really not such a great thing. If I wanted to, if I were the French, I could simply loop around and attack him next turn, but that's another problem. Now we're going to run these guys in line at these guys. So that is 4 against 6 for a pre-melee morale check. And boy, I rolled terribly. We have 24 for our morale. We rolled a 15. That must be an even better benefit than I thought. But they barely passed the morale check. So now it's the attacker's turn. He has a 33. I said it was ill-advised. And he fails. So that's fine. Fail a pre-melee morale check. So here he is, all backed up with nowhere to go. So his best opportunity is just to retreat through these units. That one unit, which is a stacking violation, which causes a morale check. And we rolled a 33, that's a 26. I think it's just a plain morale check in Premier. I don't think I do any modifiers, so he's going to stay and hold his ground. So that assault failed. I'll try this last one here. This will be 4 increments against 3. So a 1-to-1 on our melee odds. Roll the 14, that's a terrible number. So he's going to fail, and he's going to retreat. Disorder and retreat. So now this Prussian can advance into the vacated hex. Can't conduct another melee, or assault rather, but he can advance. So that'll be our assault melee phase. Now we'll move on to our morale recovery. First we'll try to rally that battalion. Just throw the dice. Got a good roll, so don't even have to look at it. I know he passed that. I think we have one other. We have that routed cavalry unit here. We threw the dice. They're reasonably high, but I know that he has a 15, so he's going to pass as well. And Premier rules, when he recovers, he becomes exhausted. I don't have to say that. We know we're playing Premier rules here, right? So that should be the end of our morale recovery. As far as cavalry readiness goes, we haven't had any cavalry resting this turn, so they all maintain their state. So there it is, a couple of turns of the Premier rules. We saw command, such as it is. We saw maneuver. The French had the freedom to maneuver, as did the Allies. It took them 3 turns to really come into contact, but they did come into contact, and that was good. We didn't see any cavalry charges, but we did see how cavalry can maneuver in melee. We saw them breach that gap that the French weren't able to close and get in the rear of their lines. Going to pose a real problem for the French, having no real cavalry themselves. We saw a little bit of combat, a little bit of melee and assault, and I think we got a feel for the Premier rules. Now, these really come to their maturity in a long play. 1 or 2 turns is never going to really reveal the nuance of a rule set. We saw some of the mechanics in action, and hopefully we can infer how the multiplayer aspect of it would work from that. So we'll call that the conclusion of the first part of our experiment.